So why do first foods even matter to your little ones? So babies are learning so much from their first few bites. First, it teaches them oral motor skills. Manipulating food in their mouth, whether it's a puree or whether they have to chew it, is a completely different skill for them than swallowing milk and sucking from a bottle or nipple. So it's teaching them oral motor skills. It's teaching them social skills. So this is like, their interaction with food. Is this something that mom and dad, or caregiver are enjoying? Is this something I'm enjoying? Or is this a situation where there's tension and bad moods happening? So they're really learning that food is a really social experience, hopefully. Ideally, we want them to learn that food is something pleasurable and enjoyable. And for babies, it's really a sensory exercise. So we think of feeding as adults, the taste of food and the smell of food. But for babies, it's really an all-encompassing sensory exercise. It's the sight of food, it's the touch of food, how it feels on their hands, how it feels in their mouth, the sound of food splashing around on their tray. It's kind of for them an all-encompassing sensory exercise for them. And it's really the foundation for their food preferences. And studies have shown that what babies eat and are introduced to in the first year of life can impact their later food choices. So we really want to think of, bland food, bland palates, and exciting foods, excitement for their palates and for their bodies. So when is baby ready to start eating? Is $1 million question. And I always recommend reaching out to your pediatrician. Summer Health is always available if you have specific questions about that, whether you want to reach out to me or your pediatrician on your team to find out and get our input on if your baby is ready. But some signs of readiness, I really think it's more important to look at a baby's signs than it is the calendar, which is my philosophy for everything, kind of, is to really here are the guidelines, but you have to look at your baby rather than putting them in a box. So some signs of readiness is they need to have good neck and head controls for a safe swallow. They need to be sitting up with support. So if you're feeling like they're gearing up for starting solids, a good thing to do maybe is just plop them in their high chair, see if they're able to sit up. If they're like all slouched over for a baby, all the muscle work and concentration will be going so much for them to just be sitting up, right? That it won't be such a great feeding experience, because again, like, feeding is not a passive experience for them. We can eat and not think about it or interact with our food. Babies are not. They really get it, it takes up so much of their focus. So if they're focusing on their posture or their neck control, they're not going to be able to focus on the food. So they also need to be showing interest in food. And I don't know if you've noticed this in your babies, and it can happen from one day to the next, that all of a sudden a light switch goes off and they're like, oh, food is something. I recognize it. Starting reaching for your yogurt if you're eating, tracking your spoon as you're eating. So also bring your baby up to in their high chair or put them on your lap while you're eating and see if they start being excited by food or reaching for it. And putting food and putting their hands and toys in their mouth is another sign. So again, baby signs are more important than the calendar. I've spoken to so many different parent groups before, and I kind of always smile when parents will tell me, their baby's 2 months old, and will be like, oh, I'm going to start solids, at like 4 months before I go back to work. And I kind of always, smile to myself, because you have no idea how your baby is going to be. So rather than putting them in a box and kind of deciding for them, see when they're ready. If someone's not on mute, if you want to all mute yourselves, that would be great. And there's some special considerations for starting baby-led weaning that actually is usually started a little bit later, which I'll get into momentarily. So kind of introducing purees is the more traditional approach, and it's spoon feeding. So you start with, typically with, this picture shows a very thin liquidy puree that basically falls off the spoon, and then you progress maybe to like a chunkier puree, which is shown below. So let's say instead of putting the banana in the food processor to make it liquid, you just take a fork and mash it so it's a little chunkier, and then you move to table foods, and you actually start with smaller pieces. Let's say the size of a Cheerio, where baby needs to have this pincer grasp where they're able to grasp something in between their pointer and their thumb and pick up, and then you progress to bigger pieces. And as chewing improves, you cut back on purees. And this method is safe to start in the 4 to 6 month range. And again, I would always clear by your pediatrician before starting solids, because 4 to 6 months is quite a big range for your baby. So I would make sure they're ready for that. And some of the pros of the puree approach is that it's very well tolerated. There's very little gagging usually. You can make the foods very nutritionally dense, because if you think of a puree, you can really add in calories and nutrients through using the formula or breast milk and adding in nut butters and seeds and kind of making it, and olive oil and making it quite nutritionally dense for the babies. It's a little easier to introduce allergens because, like I said, you can add peanut butter in very easily, and it requires a little bit less supervision, although you always want to be supervising your baby when they're eating, but it's a very safe swallow. Some of the cons to the puree, to starting with purees, is they can be bland and boring, which I'm going to take you through how to not be the case. But, you know, if you're only kind of going for like really bland, boring purees, that could be boring for your baby's palate. It can be some extra work to make or buy your baby separate food than what you're eating, because if they're eating purees, you obviously need to take that extra step to either buy them puree or put their food in the blender. So there tends to be a bigger gap between what baby is eating to what mom or dad or caregiver are giving. Some babies can get stuck on purees if parents aren't really motivated to start introducing them to bigger pieces. And it can be easier for them to avoid sensory exploration. Like if they're sucking just from a pouch, they're not really engaging with their food and seeing it. And it's easier also to force feed, because if you are feeding your baby from a spoon, you're just much more likely to speed it up because you just want, you know, to move on to the next task. So you're kind of taking the control away from baby and you're feeding them. So those are some of the cons, but I'm going to show you guys some tips for success to kind of counter all of those cons that I listed. So my approach to puree is what I like to call baby guided feeding, which is to first let the baby explore the food on their tray. So if you are giving your baby pouches, which is mostly what's available retail when you want to buy your baby store-bought baby food, I'm not anti-pouches at all. It's what's convenient. It's lighter weight than glass is, but I would just put the puree from the pouch on the tray for the baby, or in a bowl with a spoon, because it's really important for baby to see their food and interact with it rather than just sucking it straight from the pouch. And it's also really important for their oral motor development also to learn how to manipulate the puree off of the spoon rather than just sucking it straight from the pouch. I would offer flavorful purees, and it can be mixed blends. It doesn't have to be single ingredients. You can give your baby his or her own spoon, and you place the spoon right by their lip, and you let the baby open up for the food rather than just shoving the spoon in their mouth, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And you listen to when baby's telling you they're done. And you really can introduce baby to what you're eating just in a pureed form, so it doesn't have to be completely separate. And you really should introduce table foods as soon as they're showing signs of readiness so that they don't get stuck on purees. So I just want to show you guys, this is actually a video of my middle daughter when she was starting purees. And I just want to show you a different, the traditional way that people, not traditional, I should say, but just a very common thing is for parents to take the puree, stick it in the baby's mouth and kind of scrape it off the top and then just keep going. And you're like feeding the baby. But my approach is to put the spoon very close to the baby's mouth, let the baby open up their mouth and come in for it. And there's a lot less gagging. So I'm going to show you guys this video to demonstrate the difference.
Okay. I'm going to show you guys the difference between living Luna the baby-led way. I'm putting the spoon here and she's reaching in.
So she's interested in it.
Good, you like it? Yum. She's reaching in for the spoon, so she's leading the conversation, versus this common method, which is just shoving it in their mouth and scraping.
So you see she gags a little bit.
Again, you can control the baby's
it's very subtle what happens, but when I put the spoon in her mouth, she gagged a little bit. Think about you. If someone was feeding you, you can't control the pace of it. Someone's just shoving a spoon in your mouth. So I really want you to think, if you guys are going the puree route, to just really put it near their mouth and let them come in so that they're kind of controlling how much they take and their pace. So now moving on to the baby-led weaning approach, which is newer. And the idea is that you kind of skip over purees and you go straight to whole foods and you skip over the purees, and babies really feed themselves and they are not fed by the caregiver. So this whole method was created to prevent picky eating and force feeding that was starting to become more and more common. So a difference between baby-led weaning and purees is when you can start it. So for baby-led weaning, because they need to actually pick up the food themselves, which is a skill that will take some time, they need to have some oral motor, they need to have some hand-mouth coordination, and they need to have a palmar grasp, which I'll show you guys in a second. They need to be able to like put like a piece of mango strip inside their palm and gnaw at it. So that takes a little bit longer to develop those skills. So usually baby-led weaning starts 6+ months, whereas puree, you can start a little bit earlier in the 4 to 6 month range. So that is a difference. So some pros of the baby-led weaning are that you feed baby what you're eating. It's much easier to combine family meals that way. There's less prep specifically for your baby because you're giving them kind of the same things that you're eating. It can really promote adventurous eating, less of the force feeding because you're not feeding the baby. They're completely, feeding themselves. Obviously, they might need a little bit of support, but they're really picking up a piece of chicken and gnawing at it, and it's good for their oral motor strength. The cons, I would say, for baby-led weaning is that there's an increased risk of choking, more gagging. Gagging is definitely more common with this approach because you're giving them bigger pieces of food, and gagging is not a sign to stop feeding them. It's natural. It's our baby's natural protective mechanism from choking. So gagging is not a bad thing, but if there's excessive gagging, that can be uncomfortable for the baby. It certainly requires a lot of supervision. So for example, if you have another baby at home or you're just not as focused, it does require baby-led weaning, in my opinion, a lot more supervision than purees do because it is more of a choking hazard. And there's later allergen introduction because if you only start at 6 months, it might take you longer to introduce an allergen. And it's really not for every baby. So they're babies who have some low muscle tone, who have special needs, oral motor challenges, some sensory aversions, and baby-led weaning might not be for you. And again, it might not be for every parent because like I said, it requires more supervision. There are some parents who are a little bit more worried about choking. And then so I would not recommend the baby-led weaning method for you because it won't be a relaxed experience for you or for the baby. So some tips for success for baby-led weaning, some things to think about. And when it comes to baby-led weaning, like that can be its own webinar. So I'm giving you guys just a brief overview on it. So you want to offer 1 to 2 foods at a time, not to overwhelm the babies. And you actually, unlike the puree method, you actually start with bigger pieces of food. This is the palmar grasp that you see on the first picture where the baby's putting the broccoli in their palms because that skill is developed first. And then you move to smaller pieces. Like in the second picture, like a piece of a pea once the baby's pincer grasp is developed. So you actually start with bigger pieces and then you graduate to smaller pieces, which might be a little bit counterintuitive. You want to choose textures that are mashable with the gums. So anything that I like to say, if you can squeeze in between your 2 fingers is safer, is what the baby can do with their gums. So this is whether you do the puree method and are ready for table food introduction, or you just go straight to baby-led weaning. For example, eggs, bread, a meatball, you can easily mash in between your 2 fingers. So those are safe consistencies that the baby can mash with their gums. You do not need teeth for that. Dry steak, let's say, or like white meat chicken, or a peanut, you cannot crush in between your 2 fingers. So those are not safe for the babies to have because they need teeth to chew those. I would always, when you're doing baby-led weaning, check their cheeks because it's very common that babies can like store the food there and you might not notice it. And then later maybe could be a choking hazard for them. And just some things to avoid would be very sticky consistencies, like a very dry peanut butter, dried fruit, anything round. So cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, hot dogs, you want to cut those up into much smaller pieces for the baby, popcorn, and like I said, dry, hard steak and proteins. So some other tips for success when it comes to baby-led weaning is slippery textures that might be hard for them to pick up. Like think of an avocado for a baby. It might be really squishy for them and hard for them to pick up. Either you crinkle cut them, you can crinkle cut them, get a special knife. It's like a baby-led weaning tool to make it, to add some texture, or you can coat it with some coconut flour or almond flour. So that the baby can pick it up a little bit easier. And strips tend to work better than pieces. So when you're making an egg, you can make it into an omelet and cut it up into strips, or bread. And so it's strips that the baby can pick up and chew on rather than these tiny pieces that will take the baby longer to do. So I really think when it comes to which approach is right for you, you also don't have to choose. And I think there's a lot of noise out there on the parent Facebook groups. I see a lot, and just there's kind of like a lot of this like bullying over what method you're going to do. And if you don't do baby-led weaning, your baby's going to be picky. And that is entirely untrue. And being a picky eater is not a result of whether you did purees or table food. And I really believe that fed is best. And to kind of ditch this method and labeling, like parents are like, are you doing baby-led weaning? Are you doing purees? You don't even have to decide. You could decide that day what feels good. One day you can give them puree and then all of a sudden see that the baby's interested, reaching for a bigger piece of what you're eating, and you feel comfortable in that moment. And you're present and you can pay attention to the baby, you feel comfortable giving them a bigger piece. So you don't have to kind of go by a method and this is kind of my approach with parenting with other things also. I think there's just like a lot of kind of this pressure to do a certain method, put yourself in a box, put your baby in a box. And I really think you have to listen to yourself and your child and what they're telling you, and kind of to lean into that and not label it. So now I'm going to go into kind of things that are universal for whether either way, if you want to do purees or table foods, but ways to really encourage good eating and good nutrition through their first year of life. So the very first bites, what food should it be? It's really kind of, there are very few rules. And I personally think veggies and fruit are the easiest for texture and for prep wise, whether you are doing baby-led weaning or you're doing purees, they just work very well. They're very soft. Babies tend to like them. And I think start with something that you love, and it doesn't have to be bland. So you can mix with herbs and spices right away. Like my kids, their first foods were butternut squash with dill. I did the same for all of them. So you can add in healthy fats like olive oil. You can add herbs and spices right from the beginning. Foods can be raw as long as they're soft enough. So avocado and banana, for example, are raw. You don't have to cook them. Some parents ask me that. It's just a matter of texture. You just want to make it safe for the baby, but it can be raw. And I think to get into the groove first before introducing allergens, and I'm sure you've heard there's so much more research that early introduction of allergens is beneficial for the babies, which I'm going to get into, but you don't have to feel pressured to introduce allergens as their very first foods. And in fact, I usually recommend against that because I think just like get into a groove yourself, get into a groove, let the baby get into a groove, understand what it's going to look like when you feed your baby, how much prep it's actually going to take, how the baby's going to respond to it. And, get them into a little bit of a groove before introducing the allergens, because introducing the allergens can make parents a little bit stressed. And so I always try to avoid stress in the beginning and make it a really pleasurable experience for everyone. And how much do baby eat in the beginning? It's completely development over nutrition. So it's just a few spoonfuls. Most of it will end up on the floor or their mouth, and they're a bit too early to start weaning yet. Just some inspo for tasty pairings. I love peas and basil, beets and thyme, carrots and dill, zucchini and oregano, apples and ginger, oatmeal and cinnamon. And so just start with a pinch of them. And people ask me about salt. So what you want to do is, so salt, the baby's kidneys are still developing. So if you're making baby his or her own food, I wouldn't add salt. However, if the baby is eating some of what you're eating and there's some salt in it, that's totally okay. So, I would just use your judgment with that. But chances are, if you're roasting broccoli for yourself, it's going to have, some olive oil, some salt, some pepper. You can give that to baby. But if you're just making them a broccoli puree, there's no need to add salt into that. Moving on to what you need to know about the allergens. So there are 9 common, the top most common allergens in the US are eggs, tree nuts, wheat, dairy, fish, shellfish, peanuts, soy, and sesame. Sesame was like recently just added. And so when to introduce these allergens, I always recommend to speak to your pediatrician first. And a little tip that I like to share with parents is also to maybe speak to your pediatrician. This is something, again, where you can definitely reach out to Summer Health to the pediatrician. They're always available to answer your questions quickly. If there is a family history of allergies, or you're just particularly concerned about an allergic reaction, it might be helpful to get a recommendation from the doctor of what antihistamine to have in your medicine cabinet with the right dosage for the baby, so that if there is an allergic reaction, you kind of have the action plan set up so that it will save you time from the panic call to the pediatrician, where then you have to wait for, someone to answer the phone, or especially if it's off hours. Also, that's again when Summer Health, I know I feel like I keep plugging them, but really does come in handy because they are available. But it just will save you. You won't even want to have to make that text either. So just maybe have an action plan from your pediatrician already set up to know what to do in case there is an allergic reaction, because that could save you a trip from the emergency room if you're able to give them one of the antihistamines and they react okay to it. So I think when it comes to, I was telling you earlier that you can kind of mix and match. You don't need to do these single ingredient purees. So when you are ready to do fruit, let's say, you can give your baby apple, pear, banana mixed together. You don't need to do apples for 3 days, then bananas for 3 days, then pears for 3 days. That is a more conservative approach, and it just takes you much longer to give baby the foods that you're eating if you're kind of giving them every single ingredient in isolation. However, the 9 main allergens, those are foods you want to introduce for a couple of days, 3 to 5 days, to rule out that there's an allergic reaction. It doesn't have to be consecutive days. It could just be, do it over the course of a week or two, where you introduce that allergen 3 to 5 times, because sometimes the immune system can be a little bit delayed before it triggers the reaction. And you can mix it with previously tolerated foods. But let's say, for example, you're ready to introduce peanut butter and you want to mix that with banana. I would make sure you've done banana too. I wouldn't do peanuts with a new fruit or vegetable that you've never done before. So try to just do one allergen at a time and mix it with a previously tolerated food. And when to actually introduce the allergens is something, like I said, I would recommend speaking to the pediatrician about. But the official recommendations are that if your baby is at high risk for an allergy, which is something to know if they're high risk, is if they have severe eczema is one of the biggest ones for a baby. So if they are high risk for allergies based on severe eczema, usually the recommendation now is to get tested for allergens before introducing them. And if they're clear, to actually introduce them pretty early on. So that's a case where like the earlier introduction can really, really help. And specifically, the main study came out with peanuts, and introducing peanuts early can really help prevent the allergy. And if your baby is just starting to eat and you're not doing pieces yet and you want to know how to introduce peanuts, what you can do is some smooth, creamy peanut butter, mix it into with some breast milk, mix it into some oatmeal, mix it in with a fruit, or you can take some Bamba, which are like the peanut butter puffs, or there are a lot of other peanut puffs now available, dilute it with some water or breast milk, like soak it in until it turns pretty liquidy, and then give it to the baby that way. If your baby is low risk or moderate risk, really the recommendations are to kind of introduce them when you start solids. And so, like I said, what I would recommend is just doing like a couple of non-allergenic foods at first so that you and baby get into a groove, and then introduce the allergens, relatively early in their feeding journey, and not waiting until they're 1 to introduce dairy or to introduce eggs, to do it earlier on after a couple of weeks of doing some fruit or veggies or grains. So what time of day should you introduce solids? So it doesn't have to be the same time every day. It does not have to be daily in the beginning. It's something if you just want to dabble with on the weekends, let's say if you're working. So it's not something that once you start, you're committed to doing every single day, because again, in the beginning, it's really about development over nutrition, and you want to do it in between nursing or bottles, not at a feeding time, because the idea is in the beginning, the food is not really satiating them. And if they're ready for their milk and all of a sudden now you're giving them pure, whether purees or pieces, they're going to be, I think, fussy and frustrated because they're going to want their milk. So just do it in between. Ideally, it's kind of like an hour before an upcoming feed or an hour after, ideally at a time when they're not about to go in for their nap. And again, that's like kind of hard to find if you are in this stage, you feel like you're feeding your baby all the time or they're sleeping. So it really is hard to sometimes find that window, which is why I think like be flexible about it, and don't do it at a time when they're like, I wouldn't have the mentality of like, oh my God, I have to get solids and let me just like force it in when your baby looks like they're ready for their nap. Instead, just say, oh, baby looks tired. I'm actually going to skip solids today because I'd rather it be at a time when they're engaged and enjoyable. Moving on to some super nutrients for babies. So iron is a key nutrient for them, very important for their brain development, for their growth, for their cognition. And some foods that are rich in iron would be beef, poultry, eggs, tofu, or lentils and beans are more the plant-based sources of iron. So are the iron fortified baby cereals. Those are good sources of iron. And I would choose the oatmeal over rice cereal if possible. And I'm a big fan of fiber early on. It's really good for their gut microflora. All their bacteria in their gut is growing and developing, really good to just get them also used to those tastes of the high fiber foods like beans and legumes, whole grains, fruits and veggies. I love blending them into smoothies, adding them into muffins once they're eating table foods, pancakes. Healthy fats, also very important for their brain development, especially those omega-3s. So I'm really a big fan of adding olive oil, avocado to their foods. And I'm so happy to see now a lot of baby food companies, especially Cerebelly, use a lot of healthy fats in their blends, which is amazing. Ground flax seeds are a great source of omega-3s. Fatty fish, big fan of, and salmon and cod are kind of the low mercury to high omega-3 ratio, which is great. Calcium and vitamin D, they're getting a ton from their milk, so I'm not usually super concerned about those nutrients, but when you are ready to introduce dairy, try to get full fat dairy, not the low fat versions, and try to get unsweetened versions of yogurts. Just some things about just some other key food groups also. Flavors like garlic and onions, because parents ask me often are safe for your baby. Citrus like lemon and limes are okay. And just telling you, when you do give foods with citrus, whether it's oranges, lemons, even strawberries, sometimes they can get some redness around their mouth. And that's a common question that parents will call the pediatrician for. And if it's some redness around their mouth or where their hand touched the food and it was a citrus food, it's a skin reaction. It is not an allergic reaction. When it comes to beef, lamb, and poultry, always choose higher fat cuts for them. It's a better texture for them and more healthy fats. And good cooking methods is like a slow cook if you cook it in liquid for a while, or on low temperature, or to buy the ground versions and make them into meatballs or patties. Those do really well at this age. And chicken soup also I'm a big fan of if you want to venture to make that. And I mentioned earlier that beans and legumes I'm a big fan of, and you can buy canned if you want and just rinse them off so some of the sodium comes off, or you can make homemade beans if you feel adventurous enough, but who has time for that? Hummus also can be store-bought, which is great. Just some other things to think about when you're ready to introduce eggs is people ask me a lot whether you need to separate the white from the yolk, because that used to be that was an outdated recommendation. It used to be for allergies to first do the egg white, then to do the yolk, or vice versa, but just to do them separately, and you no longer have to separate them. You can introduce the whole egg, like a whisk, scrambled egg, and give it to the baby. And nuts and nut butters. So just to note, peanuts and other nuts are considered separate allergens. So those you'd want to try out separately. So you want to try peanut butter, almond butter, and start with just, 1/8 of a teaspoon, a small amount of oily, smooth nut butter, and mix it into a fruit or vegetable puree. And you want to avoid like the dry, sticky nut butters that's on the bottom of the jars. And Bombas or peanut puffs are like really good for when they're learning dissolvables and learning to pick up their food. And whenever you do grains, always try to do whole grains. I love whole wheat couscous for babies. I think it's a really great texture for them. Quinoa is really great. And they might at first do funny things with it, like stick their tongue out, but that does not mean you should stop offering it to them. It's just they're getting used to that texture on their mouth. So if they're giving making funny faces, it's not a sign to stop giving it. It's just keep exploring, keep offering it to them. Next is my baby getting enough. So every child is different, and it's so much more important to read the baby's cues than it is to have a certain amount in them. Like parents always want to know how much. And to me, quality is so much more important than quantity. And it's really hard to compare portions when you don't know what the food is. So I could say, yeah, babies need, 2 ounces of purees, or a half a cup of finger food, but an apple puree is very different than a beef quinoa, sweet potato puree. So it's really hard to compare portions. Which is why, again, focus on quality rather than quantity. And this is also just a little video from a little clip from my online series classes, which is just some signs to show you when babies had enough. I think it's good visual. Let me find it. Okay.
More, they're smiling, mouths are open, they're cooing, they're trying to grab more food or the spoon. Signs the meal is over is when they're closing their mouths, turning their heads away, fussing, crying, rubbing their eyes, and even falling asleep.
So again, I have seen babies fall asleep at the table, and I've seen just parents, kind of like one more bite. And I really want you to think about one more bite of food is not going to make your baby sleep better, is not going to do anything for them except teach them that you're actually not listening to them and they're nonverbal, but they're using their body language to communicate with you. So turning their head away, putting their hands out. These are things to let you know that the meal is over, and it's actually kind of doing more harm for them by forcing them to have that little bit than it is helpful. And these are also things I would 100% encourage you to share with any other caregivers that take care of your baby, because you might have a different philosophy, or there just might be some things that you think are just kind of obvious to you, or and it is not necessarily the same for different cultures. Everyone comes into feeding with such different beliefs and such different feelings, and so just make sure if something's important to you to just relay that to the caregiver, whether it's at daycare or whoever's watching your baby, or even your partner. Just like if to you don't want your baby to finish their food, there are some caregivers who feel like that's part of their job to feed the baby, and so they want to clean their plate, and so let them know if this is what you are, buying into, that it's not what you prefer for your baby. So weaning, since all those breastfeeding mamas want to know when this is going to happen, I can't not cover this. So milk is more important than solids in the beginning. And milk should really remain the priority in the beginning. But self-weaning typically begins around 7 to 9 months. And it's very hard for parents to grasp this, but babies really know how to do this naturally. And so I would say before 7 months, I would limit solids. If they seem really, really into it, I actually would curb them after a couple of, a couple of spoons, an ounce or two, like, maybe a quarter of a cup for baby-led weaning babies, just because if they do take in a lot, they're going to start taking less and less milk. And in the beginning, it's just 1 ounce of breast milk or formula is very complete as far as the fat, the protein, the vitamins, and the nutrients, and food cannot replace that right away. But once baby, what my like kind of my recommendation is that once babies seem like they're ready for their second meal of solids, which is like they're starting to seem fussy in between milk feedings, they're eating their meal really, really well, very proficiently, just seem like and this is something, again, you'll know it once you experience it. And it's hard to always give this advice until you're actually in the moment, but you'll just know when babies are ready for their second meal. Like I said, they're just eating their first meal really proficiently. They're starting to look fussy in between a second meal, being more really interested in what you're eating. So at that time, which usually happens around the 7 to 8 month mark, is when baby's ready for their second meal. So what you do is, instead of offering it to them in between their milks, which you've been doing for the first feeding, now they've like gotten used to food. They understand how to eat. They understand that food can be something that fills them up. You actually start introducing their second meal of solids at a typical milk time. So if, like, let's say around 11, they're usually due for their bottle or breast, then I would actually give them food first, milk second. And what's going to happen is they naturally will take a little less milk. It's harder to tell on breastfed babies because you can't see the ounces go down, but you'll just see maybe they'll go a little bit shorter, or you might not even be able to tell at all. But for bottle fed, you'll see that the ounces start going down by like 1 to 2 ounces if you give them their food first, milk second. And then by around 9 to 10 months, most babies are eating 3 meals a day, and then really a significantly cut in formula. And again, they really, really start doing it naturally. And parents are like, they like want me to give them an exact roadmap. And I promise it's not that I don't want to, it's just all babies respond a little bit differently, but they really do it naturally. Like, this is when we really want to start trusting babies, and they're so much more capable than we think. And when it comes to feeding your little one, and you're going to see as they get older and have their own opinion, which they start showing their opinion actually quite early on. Some of you can probably already attest for when it comes to preferences for bottle or breast or certain pasties. Like, they definitely tell us what they want and have their own opinions. And it's really important to kind of honor this, that they have this amazing natural ability to regulate what they need. And when we interfere too much, there's tension where they feel it, we get frustrated. So I think it's like, on this journey, if there's like one take home message, it could really be to like, you're here to help them, but it's really they are masters in understanding what they need. So I think by a year, they eventually get to around 16 to 18 ounces of milk a day, but it really happens quickly. Once you start introducing that second meal of food, their milk really starts going down and down and down. So this is just a quick chart. I'm not into parents always want to know exact numbers. This is completely a starting point. Baby, there's going to be a huge fluctuation, but really by 7 to 9 months, they're on 24 to 28 ounces of milk and 2 to 3 meals a day. And then when they turn around 10 to 12 months, it's dropped down to 18 to 24 ounces, and they're eating 3 meals and 1 snack a day. And so it really happens quickly, where you're starting with just 1 meal, and then by the time they turn a year, they're at 3 meals a day. And also what tends to happen is, once you start cutting back on, if your baby's on puree and you start introducing them to table food, what happens is their volume drops, because it's much easier to get in a lot of purees because it doesn't take as much coordination for the baby. But now, once they have to practice picking up the food, chewing it, swallowing it, they tend to take less. And then parents panic and say, oh my God, my baby's not taking as much table food, so let me like top off every meal with a puree. And I would actually recommend against that, because again, babies are really good at knowing what they need to eat. So it's a natural progression that they start taking a little bit less once they're on table foods compared to puree. It does not mean that you now have to top them off. Like, it's very tempting to, but really, again, honor kind of what they're telling you. Moving on to kind of how to build some balanced meals as you're planning their menus. For the first year is once you're like really, this is not the first couple of bites. This is kind of when they're a little bit older and on meals. You won't really want to think to include protein, whether it's animal or plant-based protein through different legumes, tofus, nut butters, dairy, seeds, quinoa, and then traditional animal protein like eggs, beef, poultry. Aim for whole grains whenever you can. I think when you're introducing pasta, just start with the whole grain variety so they get more fiber. Keep fruit to 2 to 3 times a day, not much more. They don't need every single meal sweetened with fruit or topped off with fruit at the end as like a dessert. They don't need that. Offer veggies twice a day. Always choose healthy fats and fatty fish, ideally 3 times a week. And I recommend that for adults also. Some things on creating positive mealtime environments. Again, this can be its complete own webinar, but just get messy. This is when my advice parent to parent is very annoying. I'm very sorry, but the more the kids, it is normal. They need to play with their food. They need to engage with it. So again, apologies that there's a mess afterwards, but it's really part of the process. If you're constantly over wiping them, like for an adult to imagine a wet chin is so uncomfortable. And we're looking at our baby with, peanut butter on their chin and we're like, we just need to wipe them. They look so uncomfortable. They are happy. They're more annoyed when we wipe them. So I usually say when it's warm outside, just take your baby's clothes off so that you don't mind the mess or, get a full body bib. Offer colorful food. I think get baby in the kitchen really early on. You can always put them in their high chair or even in their little swing. Give them a little wooden spoon to gnaw at, or just so that they get the smells, or they're just like really seeing that the kitchen is a place of interest. You ideally, it's a screen-free zone. So some parents will say, well, the babies eat so much better if we put on a show, but that means they're not really engaging with their food. So I'd rather them eat less, but screen-free zone. Smaller portions are also better in the beginning. And remember, it's silly, but smiling really goes a long way. So some things for creating adventurous eaters are family meals. I think about that from a really early on age. Like who are your kids eating role models? And if it's not you because you're out, just think of if the caregiver can eat with them, if they're seeing other kids eat. It's so important. They're sponges at this age and they take everything in from their surroundings. And so if they're not watching anyone else eat, they're not learning some of those skills, learning about utensils, which they don't need to know until they're older. But just start thinking about that early on in the journey. Even if they've already eaten because they eat earlier, but if you bring them over while you're eating, yes, it's a little bit of a pain because it's not as relaxing for you, but just kind of think of the messages when it's sending for the baby. Add flavor, like I said. Variety is really important to many different flavors and textures, and it can take repeat exposure. So there's a saying, it can take 15 to 20 times to try a food. In my experience, personal and professional, it can take months sometimes of exposure before a baby is interested in a certain food. Just some things to think about when you're on the go eating, if ideally to try to not order kids food and try to just give them some of what you're eating. I think things like you can always order on the go in a lot of restaurants would be a side of avocado, scrambled eggs, plain pasta, hummus, yogurt, pieces of bread, shredded cheese. And you can fork mash that for your baby. Also, so you don't have to necessarily buy them their own, or you can always grab a pouch to take on the go. And there's also Oxo Tot makes a really good food masher. It's under $10. And it's this really good kind of mortal pistol for babies to mash up some of their food if you're kind of on the go and need some more mash texture for them. So what if baby is just not that into it? So they just may not be developmentally ready. So this happens a lot, just as I'm sure you've seen this with their development from 1 week to the next, they could go through their milestone or a jump. So if you've started, I wouldn't go crazy and going oh my God, they're going to become picky eaters. And the first few bites are not, their reaction to it does not dictate that they're going to become picky eaters when they're older. And so instead of going down the rabbit hole and trying a million different foods, just wait a week and try again and see what happens. So really, again, let the baby explore and play more if they're not just so into it, rather than trying to get it in their mouth. Sometimes they just need to play with it a while, and then they stick their finger in their mouth, and then it lights, the light switch goes off that they're interested. So just be a little bit patient. Don't go into panic mode that all of a sudden they're going to become picky eaters. And if by 7 months, they're really not so interested still, that's a time when maybe I would look at cutting back some of their milk and helping them a little bit. Like maybe they just are not so hungry. So maybe getting them a little bit hungry. And if gagging or refusal is pervasive, or like they're pocketing their food or just eating in a way that your instinct is telling you this is not right, discuss with the pediatrician. RD, definitely Summer Health can help guide you through this as well. And then my last just topic will be making food versus shopping for food, and then I'll take your questions. But so making baby food, some of the perks are that it's fresh, it's creative, it's unsterilized, which is good. Like, it is good for babies to get the normal, I'm not talking about dangerous bacteria, but normal bacteria that's in food versus some of the store-bought, which is completely sterilized so that it could stay on the shelf. You can control the ingredients, which is a big perk. So it ends up being money saving in the beginning, because the baby food can add up, especially if they're eating so little of it. And you can give baby what you're eating. The drawbacks are that it's time consuming. And, as a new mom or dad, like we don't have an extra 5 minutes. So the idea of having to add something else to the routine can be really tiring. And again, my take home message is you don't have to choose, because you can do a blended approach. And I think, again, there's a lot of like strong opinions in this space of like, are you going to buy, are you going to make? And I think do what feels right to you literally that day. Like, what you're doing today will not necessarily dictate tomorrow. If you're feeling too tired today, you had planned to make your own baby food, but it's just not working for you. There's nothing wrong with getting store-bought also. I just want to show you the difference between one of the brands of store-bought sweet potatoes and homemade. It's harder to, this is a screenshot of a video, but it's definitely more vibrant and colorful, some of the homemade versions. So just something to keep in mind. It's not like store-bought is bad. It's just, there is a little bit of a difference as far as the quality can be. So to make your own baby food, what you need is really a pot with a steamer or a roasting pan. It's easiest to steam because steaming retains the moisture. So think of like carrots. If you were to steam it versus roasting it, it'll get like it'll be more dried. When you're roasting it, it'll dry out a little bit versus when you keep it moist from a steamer. But I don't think roasting is bad either. It adds more flavor also. So it just depends on kind of how you like to cook. If you want to give your baby roasted carrots because you're making it for yourself, that's fine. But if you're just making baby food for him or her, the steamer basket's the easiest. And then you just need a good food processor, a blender if you're doing purees, and some freezer safe storage containers. And for baby led weaning also, just get some, you can put everything in Ziploc bags. So anytime you are cooking for a baby or giving them something, always just freeze one portion so that you kind of always have a stock of ready-made frozen food that you can just always take out the night before for them. And people ask me if you need a baby food maker. And I think this is, again, very personal to you. If you like to cook and feel comfortable in the kitchen, I do not think you need a baby food maker. It also depends on, they can be costly and they add up storage space in your kitchen, and you use them for a very short time. So I don't know if it's necessarily worth the cost. If you are not comfortable in the kitchen, but do want to make your baby his or her own purees, then a baby food maker is nice because it kind of tells you exactly what to do. And it's just one machine. So it's one thing to clean. It's versus, a pot and then the food processor. So it's really a personal choice for you. And how to make baby food easier is I would really try to incorporate, again, what you're eating to what baby's eating, so that you're like, let me just make, some couscous for myself, and then I'll give some to baby, and maybe use a store-bought puree to blend it together so that you are kind of trying to streamline it. Using frozen prepped produce is just as nutritious and way easier. So think about even broccoli. Like if you have to buy fresh broccoli, you have to take the stem off, you have to wash it, chop it. But if you just buy a bag of frozen broccoli, and like I said, studies have shown it's just as nutritious. They've tested the levels of nutrients in frozen and in fresh, and they're basically the same. And frozen was actually found to be higher. Certain vitamins were actually higher in frozen food. So it's so much easier to just buy it prepped and batch cook and freeze. So it's what I mentioned earlier. Anytime you're cooking, I do this all the time with my kids. They're older, but like anytime I make meatballs or even rice, and I make a lot of rice and beans, I always just have a couple of portions in the freezer. So I constantly have just a rotation of just some frozen food, so that if I'm out, for the night, I always have something for them. And you can use water, breast milk, or formula when you are making homemade food. The only thing to note is breast milk, you can freeze it. However, you can't use thawed breast milk. So if you have frozen breast milk that you thaw and then cook with it, you can't refreeze it. And formula, you cannot freeze at all. So if you do plan to make your food to freeze it, either it's fresh breast milk or water is the choice. Promise you this is my last slide before my recap and questions. So just when you're shopping for baby food, I think some things to think about is to read the ingredient list, and the order of ingredients is listed in order of predominance. So the first ingredient listed will have the most in the product. So I do like to look for options that aren't diluted with water and fruit, and you will find some blends that the very first ingredient is water. And again, nothing dangerous about that, but you aren't giving your baby super nutritiously dense food because you're giving them essentially more water than any of the other ingredients in the blend. And I do like to look for options that have veggies and proteins as the first ingredient. And my message is not that I'm anti-fruit at all. I just think not every savory blend needs to have fruit sweetened with it. And there are definitely a lot of options, including Cerebelly, that have veggies and proteins as their first ingredient, which is awesome. I think to look for varieties of foods that you'd want to eat versus, this way, again, anything that baby's eating, I always like to say, if you don't want to eat it, then maybe don't give it to the baby, and check the refrigerated and freezer sections because there are lots of brands now popping up and having some frozen baby food now and refrigerated, which is kind of newer in the space. So it's not just the baby food section. So you kind of have to do a browse in the grocery store. Look for blends with flavors like olive oils, herbs, and spices. Look for blends that have protein or fiber. And if you are getting yogurt, even some of the baby yogurts, unfortunately, have added sugar. So just try to find the ones that don't have any added sugar. And lastly, pouches versus jars. I mentioned this earlier, but both are fine. It's just I really like for the baby to eat and learn how to eat from a spoon. So if you are getting pouches, ideally you're putting the puree in a bowl and giving your baby with a spoon. And it's fine also to feed them from a pouch once in a while. I've done that for my own kids when you're on the go, but I just don't want you to get into the habit of only feeding them from the pouch because it's so much less messy, which parents love. But again, from like a sensory perspective, it's much better for the baby to engage with their food. So as a recap, I would say, really listen to your baby. Every baby is different. I've, been doing this for, like I said, 15 years and having experienced it myself with 3 kids. They are all so different. None of my babies ate the same way or drank the same way, even though I was the same parent. So they all are different. Don't push if the baby's not ready. The first few bites are small and development focused over nutrition. And whether you do baby-led weaning or purees, let it be baby guided and fed is best. And the quality of meals is much more important to me than the quantity. And all babies will progress differently with portions and texture. So if your friend is like, oh, my baby at this age is already eating like 2 meals a day, but you see your baby is like kind of struggling, not struggling, but like really it's still working a lot at the 1 meal. Don't just do it because, their friend from music class is doing it. Babies are so good at knowing how to wean off of milk themselves and telling you what they want. So really listen to that. Feeding is really a sensory-based experience. Have fun with it and eat with your baby and kind of more food for more, think about more like how I can nourish myself and maybe my partner. And then we want baby to come along with it rather than so much focusing on what baby is eating and what you're giving baby, because I think anything too much attention for them, the harder, I think the higher stakes it becomes for you because you're like, oh my God, I just made all this food for you and now you're not eating it. It can be more frustrating. And the babies also feel that pressure. And so we really want babies to kind of go along with what we're doing, not necessarily we're completely modifying everything for baby. And so enjoy the experience but at the same time, like try hard, but also let go because let the baby kind of tell you what he or she wants. And again, at Summer Health, we're here for you. So if you have questions, I'm available. You can reach out directly to me. There are other nutritionists, there are pediatricians. So as soon as you have questions, you have questions on this journey, feel free to reach out. And I have a class also called Tiny Tasters, which is available online, which teaches you everything you need to know how to feed your baby. So it's everything I covered today, plus actually more information, because I could talk about this for hours. And I have a toddler class too. And on that note, we will take questions. So Jordana will actually can help maybe read some of the questions. I see a few came in, and then if you want to raise your Zoom hand or turn your screen on, your camera on, and ask, you can do that.
I'm actually not seeing the chat for some reason.
Oh, but my chat is okay. Oh, I think because they're direct messages to me.
Oh,
Okay, but I'm gonna read them out loud. How can you modify tofu to make it safer for consumption? Is silken tofu recommended? Also, what flavor would you recommend we add to tofu, and how much sodium is too much in a store-bought food like hummus? So those are good questions. So really, it depends on if you're planning to do puree. If you're planning to do puree, you could just take raw tofu, honestly, and put it in the food processor. I would do it with like a root, like a creamy root veggie, like a butternut squash or a sweet potato, I think would go really well. And then as far as flavoring goes, I think cumin would actually be really good on tofu, or you can make it more of like Mediterranean spices, like a basil, olive oil blend could be really, really good. And then as far as how much sodium is in it, all store-bought hummus is going to have added salts to it. So I wouldn't focus on a number because baby's eating so little of it. So I actually wouldn't, like, hummus in general isn't a high sodium food. So I wouldn't even look at the number. And I would say any store-bought hummus is okay. Just make sure that hummus has sesame, most hummuses, as an ingredient. So if you have not introduced sesame, that would be a new allergen. I also got asked what temperatures should the purees be when we serve them? And if we freeze them, do we thaw in the microwave? That's a great question. So room temperature is perfect. Sometimes when it's too cold, the babies can get a little uncomfortable. So room temperature, if it's like, I think about how you would want to eat also, if it's more of if it's a animal protein, let's say it's like a chicken based, maybe warm it up so it's like lukewarm, because it also, I think the flavors will come out a little bit. And as far as warming it up, you can microwave it, you can put it in a pot with boiling water, just like put the storage container in boiling water, just make sure again to touch that it's not too hot, which is similar to what you would do if you warmed up their milk. Did you say, can you guys see my screen sharing, that the questions coming up? Or no?
We can't see questions on the screen, but there's a few in the chat you can get to,
Okay.
the general chat.
Okay. Hi, did you say for baby-led weaning, you could start at 4 months if they're ready, or wait until 6 months? So for baby-led weaning, they really need to have that palmar grasp where they can pick up food themselves. 4 months, this baby would have to be a prodigy. I've never seen a baby at 4 months, because at 4 months, they're even a lot of 4 months old aren't 4-month-olds aren't even ready for purees yet. It's like 4 months is very, very early. So I would not do baby-led weaning until they're, like, I would say 5 months would be the very, very earliest. But again, definitely would get pediatrician's approval on that as far as making sure their posture is okay. How long can homemade baby food be mixed with breast milk stay in the fridge? And I think 3 days. So once you're using breast milk, I would say 3 days, or put it in the freezer and it can last for up to 6 months. My baby is really good at eating purees from a spoon, but we're trying to teach him how to eat finger food, and he's really not getting the hang of it. How important is it that he learns to eat with his fingers? How long does it take to pick up food? He's only 7 months. So babies, for sure, we do not want them to get stuck on purees, but he is very young. So I would not go into panic mode at all. And what I would do for the next, 4 to 6 weeks is every single meal that you give him purees, also give him some finger foods, have him watch you eat, play with it, have him play with it. So he's still very young. So it's completely normal that he's not interested in it yet. It just might take him some more exposure. And if you are struggling, again, reach out to us in the future. Okay. Are there more questions that I'm missing that have come up? Did you see any, Jordana, more?
I think that's it. Last call, if anyone.
Yeah,
Oh,
so if anyone has any questions that you didn't chat in,
I think Robert's going to ask one, and then we could probably wrap. But I'm going to put in the meantime while he's typing, I think you guys can use code Cerebelly. You can get 2 months for the price of 1 for Summer Health. Would love to answer all your questions. Nicole's fantastic. Literally one of our favorite specialists on the platform, but there's also specialists for sleep, for lactation, if you're still breastfeeding, behavioral. So all of your general questions that you would ask a pediatrician, and then any kind of guidance like solid sleep progressions, they're there for you. So I'll drop the code and then Robert, you can
Oh,
finish
what
with
Robert asked, he added on to my previous question in the chat. He said, how long beyond 7 months should you start to be concerned? So really, I would say by 9 months, if your baby's not accepting solids. It also depends on how long you've been doing it for, but nothing I would be concerned. But at 9 months, if they're really still gagging a lot, not really interested, not taking bites of it, it's something that I would maybe start cutting back on some of their milk to see if that helps them, and also cutting back on some of the purees to kind of challenge them a little bit. But it's fluid. It's hard to answer that exactly, but really 9 months is when I would like them to start eating some table foods. And if they haven't, that's something that, again, reach out to me or speak to your pediatrician just to get that in. And I also love this partnership with Cerebelly that Summer Health is doing with Cerebelly, because they're very good baby food brand as far as like they totally align with my recommendations for flavorful baby food, have all those good key nutrients for their brain development and growth. And so it's a good one to find and thankfully available in a lot of stores now. So cool. Yeah, I think I can't believe we're at time. Because like I said, I can always chat more. So any other questions? No?
Robert, not sure your question. But Summer Health is where you can find Nicole and all the other specialists. So it's basically you text a pediatrician or Nicole, any kind of specialist, and you'll hear back directly SMS. And so you can kind of chat with Nicole through everything. Yes, Summer Health. So we'd love to see you all there. Thank you for coming. Hoping to do a lot more of these. So please reach out with any ideas or questions you have. And thanks so much to Nicole.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.